record. Welcome, beautiful souls. And of course, it's going to be honorary, not move. It is not going to let me move. If you have ever felt like your emotions were too much, too confusing, or just in the way, this episode is for you. In today's episode, we're pulling back the curtain on emotional overwhelm. You'll discover that emotions aren't irrational or inconvenient. They're deeply intelligent messengers from your inner world. When you learn to listen rather than suppress, you unlock powerful insights and somatic clarity. We'll explore the hidden links between burnout and buried emotions, unpack how Cassandra dynamics keep women seen and unheard in their emotional truth, and guide you through the process of turning inner chaos into calm. I'm Leann Herron, certified life and health coach, transformation coach for women. I am a passionate advocate for women's health and empowerment, specializing in helping women break free from the cycle of overgiving and the stories that keep them stuck. My co-host, Lisa Anzaldua, a holistic psychotherapist, spiritual coach, and neurodiverse couples counselor who's transforming lives with her deep and integrative approach to healing and personal power. Lisa specializes in helping clients heal trauma, navigate neurodiverse relationships, and resolve generational patterns. So let's start at the root, Lisa. What are your emotions really trying to tell you? Because contrary to what many of us were taught, emotions aren't obstacles to push through or weaknesses to hide. They're signals, messengers, clues from your deep self that something matters.
Yes, exactly. Okay, so I'm going to propose that invite us to think of of emotions in two ways. One being, and this will follow up on the previous conversations we've had, and relative to what was called internal family systems, the different parts of ourselves. But first, before I go into that, we can think of there's two ways of seeing this, sort of a higher or broader perspective, and then sort of a deeper perspective. One is that essentially emotions are obviously positive emotions. They tend to, we're not concerned about those. We aspire to experience those. Our natural state is peace and joy. Our natural state of being is that. And when emotions are elevated, that's an indication that you are aligning with that which is aligned with your higher truth, aligned with your, we could say, there's various ways of thinking of this, but you can think of it as back to one of the other conversations we had, where we are an emanation of source itself. It is living, it's within us, and we are an emanation of that, a unique expression of that. And when we're aligned, when we allow our ego self allows that alignment with that unique expression of ourselves, we could say authenticity. When we're aligned with authenticity, we feel those elevated emotions more intensely, let's say, more significantly than just a state of peace. So that's kind of it's indicating that we're on the right track in general. Now it gets a little bit tricky when we also consider that with the ego construct, sense of self, and all of our experiences that we have, as we spoke of last time, we have these various parts, these sub-personalities, one could call. And that is when we have emotions that, so let me go back to the original, what I was saying first. We can consider that the emotions are a guidance system, suggesting that when we're in a negative state, when we're in a depressive state, any form of that, so experiencing shame, guilt, resentment, fear, all of those lower, heavier, let's call it, heavier and denser emotional states. That's an indication that we're veering off track from our truth. In other words, what we're thinking, the meaning we're making out of what we're experiencing is getting further and further removed and away from the truth, the ultimate truth. And so it's a guidance system. It's an alert system that says, okay, you're getting it, you're experiencing a depressive state, and it's like a bell. And ideally, it would be, the intention is there to be sort of a signal to you that your mind is starting to ruminate or hyper focus on a potential that isn't actually the truth. And so it's to tell you, pay attention to what you're thinking here and start to re-experience, reframe your experience in a way that is more aligned with the truth. And when you do that, you feel better, that is the whole point. So, and I realize that's one aspect of emotions, but let's use that as sort of the guiding component. And then we have, as we always do, so if we're in the process of elevating, of advanced personal growth, of being the best we can be, aligning with our highest values as best we can, and we're on that sort of path, we want our relationships to feel healthy. We want our body to feel healthy. So it's everything that's life-giving. If we're on that path, we can consider that the integration part, in the integration of our parts, our sub-personalities, and this ties into what we spoke about last, was that we can have, when our consciousness splits into different parts throughout our experiences throughout life, and we spoke about how we maintain that sort of that age when that's first occurred, as well as our perception of the time and the way in which we cope with it at the time. That becomes a subpersonality and has its own belief system, its own felt sense, in its own emotional complex. Okay. And then we can have another part that I mentioned that could be the opposite of that. And so now we have two very conflicting parts. We have two extremes, yeah? And by the way, we are all things. We are all extremes. We encompass everything. But when our, manifest self, so to speak, our living experiential self in the world has these very opposing, conflicting parts, that leaves us in a state of sort of chaos, and it's a chaotic state of being. And that makes us more vulnerable and susceptible to heavier emotions. So with that said, part of the integration process is meeting when these emotions occur, strong, intense emotions that upon reflection and retrospect, we can see, oh, I was completely afraid in that situation. I realize now that there was nothing actually to be afraid of, and I really got pulled into it, and I really believed from that perspective that everything was, it's just a panic attack sometimes, yeah. And so, and then we look back and we think, oh my gosh, everything was actually okay. I was just whatever at the beach or whatever. So point being that when you're in it, though, it seems so real. So we have to come to know this part. What is this part? What is it afraid of? And remember that process from last time. You bring light to, this is shadow work, right? You're sending light to that which is kind of hidden in the shadows, which is the awareness and unconditional love to that part. And you strengthen that vulnerability, and then little by little, your emotions now becomes another way. Your emotions are a signal to you. They're saying, something is out of balance here. and it's not your natural state. Therefore, let's visit that and use it as a window of opportunity, something you said earlier, a messenger to do that work and integrate so that you are your core self more of the time. And yeah, so yes, I'll end it there.
Yeah, and more in control of your emotions than your emotions controlling you.
Yeah, yeah, right.
Yeah, I can definitely see that, and it's work that I've been doing, and it's very helpful when you recognize when, like you said, when you're ruminating. What are you ruminating about? Why are these feelings coming up? Where are they coming from? Then being able to give that unconditional love to that part of you that needs it at that time, and realizing that you're not in this situation that you have hyper focused on, that you really are safe, or with, like you said, within your core. It is an amazing tool once you have kind of mastered it and learn how to use it for yourself to get out of those panic attacks, anxiety attacks. It's very helpful.
And I'm glad you used the word rumination too, and in a different concept. You're also mentioning the rumination. I think it's important for people to know, because it's so common, is that think about what that is. It's a seeking of closure and understanding, but it's a seeking of closure and understanding without having the bigger awareness, without having the bird's eye view and all of the pieces of the puzzle in front of you or in your awareness. And so it creates this feedback loop that can kind of draw. It's very magnetic, right? It can really pull you in, because your psychology needs closure and understanding. And sometimes those are the times where I say, this is when you do some breath work, you regulate your nervous system, because it's a feedback loop with your nervous system being dysregulated, and you go and do something. Absolutely, you surrender, you hand it over to source, divine, you compartmentalize it, however you want to think of that. And you actually entirely change your focus and your state of being. And I think that's just an important thing for people to consider if they find themselves in a rumination state.
Yep, that is definitely one of my suggestions. Step aside, step out of the way of what you're focused on, go outside, find something else to focus on, that 5 things you see that are yellow. Just really makes all the difference in the world for taking control back of those kind of chaotic thoughts that are running amok.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, and also in addition to that, you can ask, what part is thinking that? Because if you think it's like these multiple kind of thoughts happening at once, trying to understand things, and then you can use the parts work too and get to know the different conflicting parts.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's take it a step further, because I know that so many women that I work with, including myself, have spent years bottling up our emotions just to keep going. But that emotional suppression doesn't just disappear, it stays there under the surface. Can you speak to the connection between suppressed emotions and things like burnout and other psychosomatic issues that somebody may be experiencing?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So first, I'll preface this with saying that at some point, so first is the it will always show up in some form or fashion. Anything that we suppress or repress, it's going to show up in some form or fashion. And if we do that without intention, if we just suppress without intention, it's going to, without intent, and I'm going to talk about what intentionally, and I wouldn't even call it suppressing, I would call it intentionally using these emotions as catalysts for change. If that isn't the case and there's more of a denial and repression, then it's going to show up in very extreme ways. And I'm trying to think of an example that to kind of really clarify this. So let's say that somebody let's say that somebody feels, okay, so they, in their personality construct, they learned in their environment growing up that they have to attend to everybody else, no matter what. Like they have to acquiesce to the needs of others to their own detriment. Their needs absolutely have to be on the back burner. And it's been conditioned in order to be a worthy, good, safe individual, they must cater to others and, always make sure their needs are met and not your own. So then you start to repress your own needs, right? And so, okay, so then you go about your life and every single day that's happening. At some point in time, that's going to, because it's a state of powerlessness, and you're subconsciously you're building resentments. Subconsciously you're building, for lack of a better word, but disdain for those whom you have to acquiesce to, because that's what you learned you had to do to be safe. Nevertheless, because it's taking from you, it's draining you subconsciously, and you're not allowing that to be equilibrated, it's going to manifest as feelings of anger, sometimes hatred, sometimes rage, sometimes, if you think about it, it's your soul is seeking to balance itself. And when I say it shows up that way, is that then something very small or minor could trigger that degree of anger, and then you would act accordingly or passive aggressively. And so it's always going to kind of show up because the universe is trying to invite balance, right? A balance of love and wisdom, love for self and others. And you're not including yourself as part of that equation. And so that's what I meant by it manifesting. And then people think, and this ties to the Cassandra we're going to be leading up to here is and then another part manifests. So then let's say someone accident, because it's repressed, they act out in extreme anger, or they do something passive aggressive. And then they say, then there's another part of them that says, oh my God, this isn't me. This is, who am I? This is terrible. And they start judging themselves for that. And then shame is there. So it's like this perpetual situation, right? Instead of acknowledging initially that I'm exhausted because I keep giving into what everyone else needs, and I am not taking care of myself. And I keep saying yes when I really mean no. Let me step back. I realize that's my childhood conditioning. How can I begin to undo that? How can I, and then that's this process of everything we've been talking about, right? So yeah. Any thoughts about that before I just kind of
other than to say I lived that? Yes.
yeah.
I lived a lifetime of doing for everybody else, then taking care of someone to the point of resentment, anger, almost hate, like you said, disdain, to where I went from enjoying what I did as a caregiver, cooking, cleaning, being there for everybody else, to really resenting everything about it. Like even the food that I cooked, I had no pleasure in it. It was just a meal that didn't matter to anybody. Nobody appreciated it. And it just continued to build and build and build on this anger until, I finally hit the point where I lashed out, did something very out of character that was not me. And then I actually went to more of a justifying, like why I did what I did. which really still was not a good place for me inside. And it took a lot of undoing after leaving that relationship to see who I was becoming, because I didn't know how to set boundaries. I didn't know how to have a voice and speak up for myself. And I didn't know how to take care of myself because I had always taken care of everyone else. So thank you so much for going into all of that in the way that you did, in the direction that you took with it. Because literally it was my life.
Sounded familiar, huh? Yeah, I think we can all kind of resonate with that, you know, in some form or fashion. Yeah.
So then you brought up how we're going to look at like how it relates to the emotional phases of Cassandra syndrome. So that's something even deeper for many women who feel like they're constantly speaking but not being heard.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, right. Yeah. So, yeah, it's such a, you know, so I want to kind of step back too and acknowledge that in using the term Cassandra syndrome, and I think we've clarified what that means in previous, yeah. The goal isn't to enhance this sense of victimization by giving it a diagnosis, it's not even a diagnosis, but calling it a syndrome, you know, like a thing, but rather to bring the attention to people who are experiencing it that, oh, this is something, that at least others know that this is something, right? So it's not to use that syndrome as a term to suggest that state of victimization, but rather the experiential reality that likely has been unfolding, that you in fact have the power to and can learn strategies for overcoming and to address. And in fact, the entire Cassandra syndrome experience and your neurodiverse partner, that person can actually become a sort of reflection into aspects of your own self that are being invited to do some healing and empowerment around. Yeah. So I just wanted to mention that, but with respect to the series of emotional, so there's something called the neurodiverse couples trauma cycle. And I'm gonna craft a new one, but this one is very helpful that pre-exists, and it addresses how, you know, for instance, clients come to me when they're at stage 7 of 1 through 7 of a traumatic cycle, where they are living completely parallel lives, and even being in each other's presence, their nervous system is dysregulated, and there are some various reasons why they're still attached, and so they're in this kind of stuck place. And then this cycle, you can see that had they known, for instance, that they were a neurodiverse couple from the start, and both were accepting of that truth, they could have implemented tools along the way throughout their relationship, and that would have prevented the trauma having occurred. So with that said, it's very unlikely. So it's rare that couples get together knowing that it's a neurodivergent dynamic, and then both accepting that truth and using the tools. So what I'm saying with that is that it's more likely that what has happened is I'm somebody who's in that relationship, either their child is diagnosed at school and then they realize, oh my God, I think my wife or my husband is on the spectrum as well. And then they have this huge epiphany, and oh, no wonder all these years. And then they reflect back. And at this stage, usually is they are already feeling that sense of hopelessness and complete kind of very guarded in their partner's presence. The wall has been is kind of solidified. And then if they reflect back, and I've always noticed that there is a sequence of emotions that they both experienced. For the neurotypical holistic partner, it's usually there's this phase where they experience the love, affection, attention from their partner, who in the beginning is that person is their special interest. So there's a lot of fulfillment there. And then it's very often, and for whatever reason, that just after the union is solidified, in some way, marriage or whatever, that is no longer the case. And so suddenly, from the neurotypical angle of what's happening, suddenly their partner is like not interested, hyper focused on other things. And that is the first sort of, if you can imagine, disappointment, fear, feelings of abandonment. So then what happens usually then is, with that sort of devastation, is this eagerness to try to make it right. And so then they try to communicate different ways. They start to integrate this as self-blame. I must be doing something wrong. And then this sort of shame cycle comes up, and then they try their hardest to communicate in different ways. They sort of begin to morph themselves to be a certain way to see if that works, and to get the attention and needs met that way. That's usually ineffective. And then that then turns, if you can imagine, that then turns into well, if I can't do it by being subtle about it or by changing my communication, that sense of powerlessness is so strong. And when we feel powerless, we actually, the secondary emotion to that is anger, extreme anger. And because that's energy, right? The energy of anger, physical energy, is part of our adaptive mechanism for if you think about animals, right? When they're stuck somewhere, they need that energy to release themselves from that. So it's a similar kind of thing. And so then they express that anger, and that makes things much worse, obviously. But then from there, then they feel bad that they're angry, and there's that cycle of shame that comes up. And then from there, they usually go into a complete apathy, like this complete apathy. I completely give up. This is clearly, they start to sleep in separate rooms. It's like, and then from there, there's usually this sort of like going, what is it, day-to-day living kind of, yeah, trying to keep the peace and that sort of thing. And then that's usually when they come to me. But I just wanted to mention sort of that sequence, in case anyone's in this experience in some capacity. That is the natural progression of emotions when in the face of uncertainty and confusion about what's happening in your present relationship. And these are opportunities too. So with each one of these phases, and it would depend. So for instance, if you're in the phase of anger, this is where that parts work is very effective, because who's angry? Come to know the part of you that is experiencing that, and recognize this is where many people have this insight into whether or not the relationship is going to be sustainable. And sometimes there's this, when there's hope, sometimes hope is powerful. We all need hope, but sometimes hope, with the expectation that another person will really change, isn't healthy, because it just leads to more disappointment and that sort of thing. I'm sort of rambling now, I feel.
Not from my perspective, because again, even though you're talking about it in more of the neurodiverse, I can never say the word,
Holistic. Yeah.
I think that
Neurotypical.
these phases happen in everyday relationships, especially long-term relationships like mine was 20 years. And so it's this roller coaster of things are good, then things are bad, then things are good, and then there's that hope, and then they're bad, and then there's the anger. And if you don't have those tools, then you just almost complete the phases like a circle until, if at that point you decide that you don't think this relationship is worth saving or can be saved, that's one road that you can take. Then there's the other road towards the hope, which can either go well or go back down the other road where again you're, just reliving and repeating until there's finally something that catastrophic that happens that ends the relationship. But even then, it's full of shame, it's full of guilt. It's, if you don't have those tools to work through those things, it is a brutal existence.
Yeah, yeah. I think key is to notice, are you losing yourself? We don't, when we're in it, we're so in it and we're not reflecting on where, we're not reflecting on how much is invested in just trying to make it okay, just trying to make it feel okay, for us to feel safe. And we don't realize while we're doing that, think about all of that energy, all of that spent energy, and we completely lose ourselves. So that I think a good marker is to ask, okay, is this life giving or is this life taking? And if it's taking, then there's an opportunity for balancing it out, whether that is, and here's the thing, especially with neurodiverse couples, they don't realize, oh, I'm in a neurodiverse relationship, so it's like, so hopefully that would be brought to someone's awareness, or if in a trauma, aside from neurodiversity or not, like you had said, any relationship really is this noticing things like, reading about what a trauma bond is, reading about what is considered healthy and productive and what isn't, because some of us, we weren't really taught, we didn't have that exposure, so we don't know. So, research around that, and then remembering, if again, you think about, I say with clients, I say, it's not, because everything is a construct, right? So everyone's going to have, from culture to culture, we're all going to have our own opinions, even within own family dynamics, about what is considered good in a relationship, what is healthy, so to speak, and what isn't. I'd say eliminate all of those constructs and narratives and just think about the physiology of a human being and life itself, and ask the question, is this life-giving or life-taking? And when you ask that question, you realize things like, what are the values what is the energy that is needed in order for something to be life-giving, for it to be expansive, and for things to grow, for things to develop and expand, which is life. What are the fundamentals? And the fundamentals are safety. We talked about having a safe base relative to attachments the other day. Yeah. Things, so then you think, okay, let's just start with that. If safety is fundamental, then what would be required in order for that to be felt? Oh, trust. Oh, respect. Communication. So it's like then those sort of other factors, experiential kind of markers fall into place. And then so you keep asking that question, what is life giving? And can let yourself kind of come to that realization of what those markers are. And then ask, well, what is required for that to occur? And then you have your sort of foundation for, okay, this is what I need. It's not, and it isn't selfish. It is life-giving. Even consider it beyond just the self, and think of it that way. And then you do everything you can in your power to establish boundaries that will allow for trust etc., to communication to be the experiential reality. And when the other person isn't willing to do that, you know, those are the sorts of things that allow us to come to these being truthful with ourselves, if this is something that is healthy or not healthy. You know, we just, because you have committed anyway, I don't want to go into that too much. It's just you know,
Yeah.
we're more empowered than we realize, I think. Okay.
Yeah. This was such a rich conversation. I want to thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and your skills and your practices and helping bring these things to light for many women who don't have the knowledge, who may be feeling like they're losing their minds. Like, why is this not this way? Or what can I do? Or what have I done? You know, this really provides information to start that conversation with ourselves.
Right.
So I appreciate you and your time. To our listeners, if you'd like to learn more about me or Lisa, make sure you head over to our websites. Our links will be in the show notes. And I'd like to, again, thank you for your time, Lisa. This has been just a powerful episode.
Thank you, Leann. Thank you so much. I appreciate your time.